Welcome to Slumbertainment. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let yourself relax. Tonight we explore the history of water and sewerage systems. Please like and subscribe for more restful content. Now, let's begin. Water is perhaps the most essential element of human civilization, and yet for most of history, the simple act of bringing clean water to where people lived and carrying away what they no longer needed represented one of humanity's greatest challenges. Long before we built skyscrapers or sent rockets into space, our ancestors were solving the fundamental puzzle of water management, creating systems that would shape the very foundations of urban life. The story of water and sewerage is not merely a tale of pipes and pumps, but a chronicle of human ingenuity, public health, and the invisible infrastructure that makes modern life possible. In the beginning, human settlements formed naturally around water sources. Rivers, springs, and wells determined where communities could exist, and for thousands of years, people simply lived close to the water they needed. But as populations grew and villages became towns, a profound challenge emerged. The same water source that provided drinking water could become contaminated by human waste, creating a dangerous cycle that would claim countless lives throughout history. Ancient peoples recognized this problem, even if they did not fully understand the mechanisms behind it, and they began to devise solutions that would echo through the millennia. The earliest evidence of deliberate water management dates back more than 4,000 years to the Indus Valley civilization, in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. Here, in cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, archaeologists have uncovered remarkably sophisticated systems of water supply and drainage. These ancient urban centres featured covered drains running along the streets, constructed from precisely fitted bricks that created watertight channels. Individual homes had their own bathing areas connected to these public drains, and many houses even had what appear to be early toilets, with waste flowing into underground sewers or cesspits. The level of planning and engineering skill required to create such systems suggests that water management was considered a civic priority of the highest order, something that required coordination and resources on a grand scale. Across the ancient world, other civilizations were developing their own approaches to the water challenge. In Mesopotamia, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, complex irrigation systems brought water to agricultural fields, while cities developed drainage channels to manage both rainwater and wastewater. The ingenuity of these early engineers is striking when we consider the tools and knowledge available to them. Without modern materials or scientific understanding of waterborne disease, they nonetheless recognized that moving water away from living spaces improved health and quality of life, even if they attributed the benefits to miasmas or bad air, rather than microorganisms they could not see. Perhaps no ancient civilization is more celebrated for its water engineering than Rome. The Romans elevated water management to an art form, creating infrastructure on a scale that would not be matched again for over 1,000 years. Their famous aqueducts, striding across valleys on elegant arches, captured the imagination of all who saw them. These structures were not merely functional, but were statements of power and capability, visible demonstrations of Rome's ability to bend nature to its will. The aqueducts brought fresh water from distant springs and mountains into the heart of the city, using nothing more than gravity and careful engineering. The Romans understood the principle that water flows downhill, and they calculated precise gradients, sometimes descending only a few centimetres per kilometre, to maintain steady flow over distances of 50 kilometres or more. Within Rome itself, water flowed constantly through public fountains, baths, and private homes for those wealthy enough to afford a direct connection. The Roman approach to water was one of abundance rather than conservation, with fresh water continuously flushing through the system. This constant flow served a dual purpose, providing clean water for consumption and bathing while also helping to flush away waste. The famous Roman baths were not just places of cleanliness, but social centres where citizens gathered, talked, and conducted business, all made possible by the reliable delivery of vast quantities of water. The scale of Roman water consumption was extraordinary, with some estimates suggesting that ancient Rome used as much water per capita as many modern cities, a testament to the efficiency and ambition of their engineering. The sewerage side of Roman infrastructure was equally impressive, though perhaps less celebrated. The Cloaca Maxima, or Great Sewer, was one of the world's earliest sewage systems, originally built to drain the marshy valleys between Rome's 7 hills. Over time, it evolved into a comprehensive network that collected waste from public latrines and private homes, carrying it away to the Tiber River. The Romans built their sewers large enough for maintenance workers to walk through, and some of these ancient tunnels remain in use today, nearly 2,000 years after their construction. The engineering principles they established, using gravity flow, regular gradients, and durable materials, would influence sewer design well into the modern era. Yet for all their sophistication, Roman systems were not perfect, and they were certainly not available to everyone. Outside the great cities, in the vast rural areas where most people lived, water management remained simple and localized. Wells, cisterns, and simple drainage ditches served most communities adequately, though without the grandeur of urban infrastructure. And even within Rome, the benefits of advanced water systems were unevenly distributed, with the wealthy enjoying private connections while the poor relied on public fountains and facilities. This tension between universal need and unequal access would remain a defining feature of water infrastructure throughout history. The knowledge and systems of Rome represented a high point that would not be matched for many centuries. As the Roman Empire declined and eventually fell, much of this accumulated expertise was lost or forgotten in Europe, though it persisted in some form in the Eastern Roman Empire and in the Islamic world, where scholars preserved and built upon ancient knowledge. The story of water and sewerage would enter a long period of fragmentation and local variation, with each community developing its own solutions to the eternal problem of bringing in clean water and removing waste. The great systems of antiquity faded, their ruins standing as reminders of what had been achieved and what had been lost, waiting for future generations to rediscover and surpass them. The centuries following the fall of Rome saw Europe enter a period often called the Middle Ages, and with it came dramatic changes in how people managed water and waste. The grand aqueducts fell into disrepair, their maintenance too costly for the fragmented kingdoms that replaced the empire. Cities that had once enjoyed flowing water from distant sources now relied on local wells, rivers, and rainwater collection. The knowledge of large-scale engineering had not disappeared entirely, but the political and economic conditions necessary to implement such projects had fractured. Water management became a local concern once again, handled by individual households, religious institutions, and town councils rather than centralised imperial authority. Medieval cities developed their own character when it came to water and sanitation, often quite different from the Roman model. Streets were narrower, buildings taller and more tightly packed, and the challenge of managing waste in such confined spaces became increasingly acute as populations grew. Many cities were built along rivers, which served the dual purpose of providing fresh water upstream and carrying away waste downstream. This arrangement worked adequately for small populations, but as towns expanded into cities, the system's limitations became painfully apparent. The same river that provided drinking water in one neighbourhood might receive the waste of another just a short distance away. Yet without understanding the connection between contaminated water and illness, communities continued these practices for centuries, accepting periodic outbreaks of disease as an unavoidable aspect of urban life. Water supply in medieval towns often relied on public wells and fountains, which became social gathering points much as Roman baths had been. These wells tapped into groundwater, and their placement was carefully considered, though not always with the hydrological understanding we have today. Sometimes wells were sunk in market squares or churchyards, places of civic importance that were not necessarily the safest locations from a contamination standpoint. Wealthier households might have private wells in their courtyards, while most people drew water from communal sources, carrying it home in buckets and containers. The labour of water carrying fell primarily to women and children, a daily task that structured the rhythm of household life. In parts of the Islamic world, meanwhile, water management continued to advance through these same centuries. Cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba developed sophisticated systems that drew on both Roman precedents and local innovations. The qanat system, which originated in ancient Persia, represented a brilliant solution to bringing water from distant sources through arid landscapes. These underground channels, sometimes stretching for many kilometres, tapped into aquifers in mountainous regions and used gentle gradients to transport water to cities and agricultural areas. The underground construction minimised evaporation in hot climates, and the system required no pumping, relying entirely on gravity. Vertical shafts along the qanat's length allowed for construction, maintenance, and ventilation, creating a sustainable water supply that some communities still use today. Islamic cities also developed elaborate public bathing facilities, continuing a tradition that had largely disappeared in Western Europe. These hammams were not mere places of cleanliness, but social institutions, centres of community life where people gathered, relaxed, and conducted informal business. The architecture of these baths reflected sophisticated understanding of water heating, circulation, and drainage, with systems that separated clean water supply from wastewater and used efficient furnaces to heat large volumes of water. The cultural and religious importance placed on cleanliness in Islamic tradition drove innovations in water technology, demonstrating how social values shape technological development. In China, water management evolved along its own trajectory, influenced by different geographic challenges and cultural priorities. The country's great rivers, the Yellow and the Yangtze, were both life-giving and dangerous, prone to devastating floods that could reshape entire regions. Chinese engineers developed extensive systems of canals, dikes, and reservoirs, managing water on a vast scale for irrigation, transportation, and flood control. Cities built sophisticated drainage systems, and wells were carefully maintained according to principles that emphasized harmony with natural water flows. The Chinese approach often emphasized working with natural patterns rather than imposing rigid geometric systems, a philosophy that would prove remarkably enduring. Back in Europe, the late medieval period saw the rise of new institutions dedicated to water management. Monastic communities, with their commitment to self-sufficiency and order, often developed exemplary water systems. Monasteries were typically built near reliable water sources, and monks engineered elaborate networks to bring water to different areas of their compounds. Fish ponds, mills, laundries, kitchens and latrines were all carefully planned to use water efficiently while maintaining separation between clean and contaminated flows. The Cistercian order, in particular, became renowned for their hydraulic engineering, and their monasteries across Europe featured systems that rivaled anything from the Roman era. These monastic solutions demonstrated that with sufficient organisation, resources, and technical knowledge, medieval society could indeed create sophisticated water infrastructure. Cities began to formalise water supply through municipal authorities. In London, The first piped water system since Roman times was constructed in the 13th century, bringing water from a spring in Tyburn to a public conduit near Cheapside. Similar systems appeared in other European cities, often funded by wealthy patrons or civic authorities who recognised the public benefit. These early systems were modest compared to Roman aqueducts, but they represented an important shift toward viewing water supply as a collective responsibility rather than purely an individual concern. The construction and maintenance of public waterworks required coordination, funding, and technical expertise, laying groundwork for the more ambitious projects that would come later. Yet sewerage lagged far behind water supply in medieval cities. Most waste was simply thrown into streets, collected in cesspits, or dumped into nearby waterways. Some cities attempted to regulate these practices, passing laws about where waste could be disposed and requiring property owners to maintain cesspits, but enforcement was inconsistent. The accumulation of waste in urban areas created obvious problems of smell and nuisance, yet the connection to disease remained poorly understood. Medieval people recognised that filth was unpleasant and probably unhealthy, but they lacked the scientific framework to understand exactly why or to develop systematic solutions. The miasma theory, which held that bad air or foul smells caused disease, was the prevailing explanation, and it would persist for centuries more, shaping responses to sanitation challenges in ways both helpful and limiting. The transformation of water and sewerage systems truly began in earnest during the 19th century, driven by a convergence of factors that would reshape cities across the world. Industrialization brought unprecedented urban growth, as people flooded from countryside to city seeking work in factories and mills. London's population, for instance, grew from roughly 1 million at the start of the 1800s to over 6 million by its end. Paris, New York, Berlin, and countless other cities experienced similar explosive growth. This rapid urbanization placed enormous strain on water and sanitation infrastructure that had been designed, if it could be called designed at all, for much smaller populations. The result was increasingly crowded, unsanitary conditions that created public health crises impossible to ignore. The water supply situation in early industrial cities was dire by any measure. Rivers that had once provided adequate water for modest populations now struggled to meet demand while simultaneously receiving ever greater volumes of waste from homes, factories, and slaughterhouses. In London, the Thames became so polluted that it was described as an open sewer, its smell so overwhelming during the hot summer of 1858, an event remembered as the Great Stink, that Parliament had to soak its curtains in chloride of lime to mask the odour. Similar conditions prevailed in cities worldwide. Wells became contaminated as cesspits overflowed and seeped into groundwater. The traditional methods of waste disposal, already inadequate, collapsed entirely under the weight of industrial-scale population density. Into this crisis came a revolution in understanding. For centuries, the miasma theory had dominated thinking about disease, but in the mid-19th century, pioneering researchers began to challenge this view. The breakthrough came through careful observation and what we would now call epidemiology, the study of disease patterns in populations. Investigators noticed that illnesses seemed to cluster around particular water sources, suggesting that water itself, not merely bad air, might be the culprit. This insight, gradually accepted despite considerable resistance from established authorities, transformed approaches to urban sanitation. If contaminated water spread disease, then separating clean water supply from wastewater disposal became not merely a matter of convenience or aesthetics, but a life or death public health imperative. The response to this understanding varied by city and country, but certain patterns emerged. Cities began to look beyond their immediate boundaries for clean water sources, reviving the Roman principle of bringing water from distant, unpolluted areas. New York developed the Croton Aqueduct system, completed in 1842, which brought water from 40 kilometres away, providing the city with reliable clean water for the first time. The system used gravity flow, much like Roman aqueducts, but employed new materials and construction techniques that allowed for larger volumes and greater reliability. Similar projects followed in other American cities, with Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago all developing long-distance water supply systems in the mid-1800s. In Britain, the response took a different form, driven in part by the particular geography and governance structures of the time. Liverpool pioneered the development of large reservoirs in upland areas, damming valleys to create artificial lakes that could store vast quantities of clean water. Manchester followed with even more ambitious reservoir systems in the Peak District, and eventually London looked to Wales for its water supply. These projects required enormous investment and complex engineering, with reservoirs, treatment works, and hundreds of kilometres of pipes all needing to be planned and constructed. The scale of these undertakings reflected a growing acceptance that water supply was a public good, requiring public funding and coordination, not something that could be left to private wells and small-scale entrepreneurs. Paris approached the challenge with characteristic Gallic ambition, completely rebuilding much of the city in the mid-1800s under the direction of Baron Haussmann. The transformation included not just the famous wide boulevards and grand buildings, but also comprehensive water and sewer systems hidden beneath the streets. The sewers of Paris became so famous that they offered public tours, with visitors travelling through the underground passages by boat to see the engineering marvel firsthand. The system separated stormwater from sewage, used gravity flow wherever possible, and incorporated regular access points for maintenance. It represented a holistic vision of urban infrastructure, where water supply, sewerage, and street layout were all planned together as an integrated whole. The engineering challenges of these projects were formidable. Moving large volumes of water required pipes of unprecedented size and strength. Early systems often used hollow logs or clay pipes, but these proved inadequate for the pressures and volumes involved in modern systems. Cast iron emerged as the material of choice, despite its expense, because it could withstand high pressures and last for decades. The manufacturing of cast iron pipes itself became a major industry, with foundries producing standardized sections that could be joined together to create networks spanning entire cities. The development of reliable joints and valves was equally crucial, allowing workers to control water flow, isolate sections for repair, and manage pressure throughout the system. Sewerage presented even greater challenges than water supply. Unlike water, which can be pushed through pipes under pressure, sewage must flow by gravity, requiring carefully calculated gradients and large diameter pipes. Cities had to dig up streets and excavate deep trenches to install sewers at depths that would allow waste from basements and ground floors to drain properly. The work was dirty, dangerous, and expensive, disrupting cities for years as crews worked their way through neighbourhood after neighbourhood. In some cases, entire districts had to be elevated, with buildings raised on jacks while new sewers were installed underneath, and then fill brought in to raise street levels. The scale and complexity of this work tested the limits of engineering knowledge and construction capability. The question of what to do with sewage once collected posed yet another challenge. Simply dumping it into rivers, the traditional solution, was no longer acceptable given the volumes involved and growing understanding of water pollution. Cities experimented with various approaches. Some treated sewage chemically before discharge. Others used it to irrigate agricultural land, turning waste into a resource. Still others built systems to carry sewage far from the city before release, hoping dilution in large bodies of water would solve the problem. None of these solutions proved entirely satisfactory, and the search for better methods of sewage treatment would continue into the 20th century, driving innovations that would eventually transform waste management entirely. As the 20th century dawned, cities had largely solved the problem of delivering clean water to their populations, at least in the industrialized world. The great aqueducts, reservoirs, and pipe networks constructed in the previous decades were delivering unprecedented volumes of fresh water to homes and businesses. Yet a crucial piece of the puzzle remained incomplete. While sewage collection had improved dramatically, the question of what to do with that sewage once collected continued to vex engineers and public health officials. Simply releasing raw sewage into rivers and oceans, even at points far from population centres, was creating new problems. Beaches became unusable, fishing grounds contaminated, and downstream communities found their water sources compromised. The solution would require a new approach, one that didn't merely move pollution from one place to another, but actually treated and purified wastewater before returning it to the environment. The development of sewage treatment represented a triumph of applied science, combining insights from biology, chemistry, and engineering into integrated systems that could process millions of litres of wastewater daily. The key insight was that nature itself provided a model for purification. In rivers and streams, organic matter naturally breaks down through the action of bacteria and other microorganisms, a process that occurs wherever water and waste meet. The challenge was to harness and accelerate these natural processes in a controlled environment, creating conditions where beneficial bacteria could thrive and efficiently break down pollutants. This biological treatment, combined with physical and chemical processes, would form the foundation of modern sewage treatment. Early treatment systems began with simple settling tanks, where sewage was held in large basins, allowing solids to sink to the bottom while clearer water flowed off the top. This primary treatment removed perhaps 30 to 40% of pollutants, a significant improvement but far from sufficient. The settled solids, known as sludge, could be removed and processed separately, but the remaining liquids still contained dissolved organic matter and harmful bacteria. The breakthrough came with secondary treatment processes that used biological action to further purify the water. The trickling filter, developed in the late 1800s, was one early solution. Wastewater was sprayed over beds of stones or other media, creating thin films of water where bacteria could grow and consume organic matter as the water slowly trickled through. A more efficient approach emerged in the early 1900s with the activated sludge process, which remains the most widely used sewage treatment method worldwide. In this system, wastewater is mixed with air and existing colonies of beneficial bacteria in large tanks. The bacteria consume organic matter in the sewage, multiplying rapidly in the oxygen-rich environment. After several hours, the mixture flows to settling tanks where the bacteria clump together and sink, forming a dense sludge. Most of this sludge is returned to the aeration tanks to maintain the bacterial population, while the clarified water continues to further treatment. The elegance of this system lies in its self-sustaining nature, with the bacteria population naturally adjusting to the amount of waste available, requiring relatively little ongoing intervention beyond maintaining proper oxygen levels and removing excess sludge. The implementation of these treatment technologies required massive infrastructure investments. Cities that had spent decades building sewer networks now had to construct treatment plants, often covering many hectares and requiring substantial ongoing operating costs. The plants needed skilled operators who understood the delicate balance of biological processes, the chemistry of water treatment, and the mechanical operation of pumps, aerators, and settling tanks. Despite the challenges, city after city embraced sewage treatment, driven by public health concerns, environmental awareness, and often by legal requirements as governments began regulating water pollution. By mid-century, comprehensive sewage treatment had become the standard in developed nations, though implementation varied widely in pace and effectiveness. While sewage treatment advanced, parallel innovations transformed water treatment. Even water from relatively clean sources like mountain reservoirs required treatment before distribution. The processes developed were similar in principle to sewage treatment, but focused on different goals. Filtration through sand beds removed particles and many microorganisms, a technique that had been used in various forms for centuries but was now refined and standardized. Coagulation, where chemicals are added to make tiny particles clump together so they can be filtered out more easily, improved the efficiency of treatment. Most importantly, disinfection with chlorine became standard practice, providing a reliable way to kill any remaining disease-causing organisms. The addition of chlorine to public water supplies, beginning in the early 1900s, ranks among the most significant public health interventions in history, dramatically reducing waterborne disease in communities worldwide. The mid-20th century also saw innovations in how water systems were powered and controlled. Earlier systems relied primarily on gravity, with water towers and elevated reservoirs providing pressure through sheer height. While effective, this approach had limitations in flat terrain or for supplying water to tall buildings. Electric pumps, growing more reliable and efficient, allowed water to be pushed through systems at controlled pressures, enabling cities to expand beyond the constraints of topography. Automated controls replaced manual valve operation, with sensors monitoring pressure, flow, and water quality throughout the network. These advances made systems more responsive and reliable, reducing water loss from leaks and ensuring consistent service even as demand fluctuated throughout the day. In the developing world, the story was more complex. Colonial powers often built water infrastructure in major cities, creating islands of modern service surrounded by vast areas with minimal or no improvements. As nations gained independence through the mid-20th century, they inherited systems that served only a fraction of their populations, typically the wealthiest urban areas. Expanding these services to everyone became a major development priority, but the challenge was immense. Rural areas often lacked not just infrastructure, but the institutional capacity to plan, build, and maintain water systems. Different approaches emerged, from large-scale projects modelled on Western systems to smaller, community-based solutions using simpler technologies. Hand pumps accessing groundwater, protected wells with proper drainage, and basic latrines represented enormous improvements over traditional practices, even if they fell short of comprehensive piped water and sewerage. International organisations began to recognise access to clean water and sanitation as fundamental development issues, not merely technical problems, but matters of human dignity and public health. Programs to improve water access in developing nations proliferated, though results were mixed. The most successful initiatives recognised that technology alone was insufficient, that sustainable improvements required community involvement, appropriate technology choices, and long-term maintenance plans. A hand pump that breaks and cannot be repaired serves no one. A latrine that people won't use because it doesn't fit cultural norms accomplishes nothing. The lesson, learned sometimes painfully through failed projects, was that water infrastructure must be adapted to local conditions, built with local participation, and maintained through local capacity. By the late 20th century, the basic architecture of modern water and sewerage systems had been established across much of the world. Cities drew water from distant sources, treated it to high standards, delivered it through extensive pipe networks, collected wastewater through separate sewer systems, and treated that wastewater before returning it to the environment. Yet even as these systems reached maturity, new challenges emerged that would test the sustainability and resilience of infrastructure built decades or even centuries earlier. The story of water and sewerage was entering a new phase, one focused less on building new systems and more on maintaining, adapting, and improving what already existed. One of the most pressing challenges facing mature water systems is simply their age. The pipes, pumps, and treatment facilities built during the great infrastructure expansion of the late 1800s and early 1900s were designed to last many decades, but not forever. Cast iron pipes, while durable, eventually corrode and crack. Concrete structures deteriorate. Mechanical equipment wears out. By the late 20th century, much of the infrastructure in older cities was approaching or exceeding its designed lifespan. The result was increasing rates of water main breaks, sewer collapses, and system failures that disrupted service and wasted precious resources. Studies in developed nations found that water loss from leaking pipes could reach 30, 40, or even 50% of supply in some systems, an astonishing waste of both water and the energy required to pump and treat it. Replacing aging infrastructure presents enormous challenges, both financial and logistical. The cost of replacing all the pipes in a major city can run into billions of dollars, money that must be found in budgets already stretched by competing demands. Even when funding is available, the work itself is disruptive, requiring streets to be excavated, traffic rerouted, and service interrupted. Cities must balance the need for replacement against other priorities, often choosing to patch and repair rather than comprehensively rebuild. This approach, while understandable, can be penny-wise and pound-foolish, as emergency repairs to failed pipes cost far more than planned replacement of deteriorating ones. Finding the right balance between repair and replacement, and developing strategies to prioritise which infrastructure to upgrade first, has become a central concern for water utilities worldwide. Climate change adds another layer of complexity to water management challenges. Weather patterns that were relatively stable for centuries are shifting, bringing new extremes of both drought and flood. Regions that historically enjoyed reliable rainfall find themselves facing water scarcity, while others experience more intense storms that overwhelm drainage systems designed for different conditions. These changes require water systems to become more flexible and resilient, capable of adapting to conditions that may differ significantly from historical patterns. Storage capacity becomes more valuable when rainfall is less predictable. Flood defences must be strengthened as storm intensity increases. Water conservation, once primarily a concern in arid regions, becomes important everywhere as the reliability of traditional sources diminishes. The growing scarcity of fresh water in many regions has driven innovation in finding new sources. Desalination, the process of removing salt from seawater to make it suitable for drinking, has advanced dramatically in recent decades. Early desalination plants were expensive to build and operate, requiring enormous amounts of energy to force seawater through membranes or to distill it through heating and evaporation. Modern plants, using reverse osmosis technology, are more efficient but still energy intensive compared to treating fresh water. Nevertheless, for coastal cities in water-scarce regions, desalination has become an essential part of water supply strategy. Israel, for instance, now derives more than half its drinking water from desalination, transforming a nation that once faced chronic water shortages into one with a secure supply. Similar plants have been built in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, California, and many other water-stressed locations. Water reuse represents another frontier in expanding available supply. Advanced treatment technologies can now purify wastewater to standards that meet or exceed drinking water quality, though public acceptance of drinking recycled water has been slow in many places. The psychological barrier is significant, with people naturally reluctant to drink water that was recently sewage, regardless of assurances about treatment effectiveness. Yet this reluctance is gradually being overcome through education and experience. Singapore's New Water program treats wastewater to extremely high standards and uses it primarily for industrial purposes and to replenish reservoirs, where it mixes with rainwater before eventual use as drinking water. California and other water-scarce regions have implemented similar programs, recognizing that treating and reusing water locally can be more sustainable than importing it from ever more distant sources. The energy requirements of water systems have come under increasing scrutiny as concerns about climate change and sustainability have grown. Moving water requires energy, whether through pumping or the energy embedded in building elevated storage. Treating water and wastewater also consumes substantial energy. In many cities, water and wastewater utilities are among the largest consumers of electricity, accounting for several % of total energy use. This creates both challenges and opportunities. The challenge is reducing energy consumption while maintaining service quality. The opportunity lies in recovering energy from water systems themselves. Wastewater contains significant chemical energy in the organic matter it carries, and modern treatment plants can capture this through anaerobic digestion, where bacteria break down organic matter in the absence of oxygen, producing methane gas that can be burned to generate electricity or heat. Some advanced treatment plants now produce more energy than they consume, transforming from net energy consumers into generators. Technology is reshaping how water systems are monitored and managed. Sensors embedded throughout networks can detect leaks, measure water quality, and monitor pressure in real time, allowing operators to respond quickly to problems and optimize system performance. Smart meters in homes and businesses provide detailed information about water use, helping to identify leaks and enabling more sophisticated pricing structures that encourage conservation. Data analysis and modeling help utilities predict future demand, plan maintenance, and prepare for emergencies. These digital tools don't replace the physical infrastructure of pipes and treatment plants, but they make that infrastructure more efficient and responsive, extending its useful life and improving service quality. Yet for all these technological advances, fundamental questions about water governance and equity remain. Who should pay for water infrastructure? Should water be priced to recover costs or subsidized as a basic necessity? How do we balance the needs of agriculture, which uses the majority of water in many regions, with urban and industrial demands? How do we ensure that vulnerable populations have access to safe water, even when they cannot afford to pay market rates? These questions have no simple answers, and different societies have reached different conclusions. What remains constant is the recognition that access to clean water and sanitation is fundamental to human health and dignity, that the infrastructure providing these services requires ongoing investment and stewardship, and that decisions about water affect not just current populations, but generations to come. Beneath the streets of every modern city lies a hidden world, a vast network of pipes, tunnels, and chambers that forms the circulatory system of urban life. This underground infrastructure, largely invisible to those who depend on it daily, represents one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements. To understand how modern water and sewerage systems actually work requires descending below the surface, tracing the journey water takes from source to tap and back again. following the intricate pathways that make contemporary urban existence possible. The complexity of these systems is remarkable, yet their operation relies on principles that would be recognizable to ancient Roman engineers, updated and refined through centuries of experience and innovation. The journey begins far from the city itself, at the water source. This might be a river, lake, reservoir, or aquifer, carefully chosen for its quality and reliability. Water utilities maintain these source areas with great care, often owning or controlling land around reservoirs to prevent contamination. Raw water entering the treatment system carries sediment, organic matter, and potentially harmful microorganisms that must be removed before the water is safe to drink. The first step in treatment is often screening, where large debris like leaves, branches, and other materials are filtered out through coarse screens or grates. This protects downstream equipment and removes the most obvious contaminants, though the water at this stage is still far from drinkable. From screening, water flows to settling basins where it remains relatively still, allowing heavier particles to sink to the bottom. To speed this process, treatment plants add coagulants, chemicals that cause tiny suspended particles to clump together into larger aggregates called floc. These flocs settle much faster than individual particles, carrying down with them many of the impurities in the water. Watching this process in a treatment plant is oddly mesmerizing, as water that enters cloudy and murky gradually clears, the floc forming visible clouds that slowly drift downward. The settled floc is removed as sludge, while the clarified water continues to the next treatment stage. Filtration provides another layer of purification, typically using beds of sand and gravel through which water slowly percolates. These filters work both mechanically, trapping particles too small to settle, and biologically, as beneficial bacteria colonize the filter media and consume organic matter. Filter beds must be regularly cleaned by backwashing, reversing the flow of water to lift and rinse the filter media, removing accumulated material. The filtered water is clearer and cleaner, but still requires disinfection before it can be considered safe for drinking. This is where chlorine enters the process, added in carefully controlled amounts sufficient to kill pathogens, but not so much as to leave unpleasant taste or odour. Some systems use ultraviolet light or ozone for disinfection, alternatives that avoid the chemical residues of chlorine, though chlorine remains most common because it provides ongoing protection as water travels through the distribution system. Once treated, water must be stored and distributed. Storage tanks and reservoirs, whether ground level, elevated, or underground, serve multiple purposes. They provide reserve capacity for periods of high demand, equalize pressure throughout the system, and ensure supply continuity if treatment must be temporarily interrupted. Elevated tanks use gravity to maintain pressure, with water height determining the pressure at ground level. A tank raised 30 metres provides roughly 3 times the pressure of one raised 10 metres, a simple relationship that governs tank placement and design. From storage, water flows through a branching network of pipes, growing progressively smaller as they divide and subdivide, like an inverted tree reaching every building. Large transmission mains might measure over 1 metre in diameter, carrying water from treatment plants to storage or to different areas of the city. Distribution mains range from perhaps 30 centimetres down to the service connections, entering individual properties, which might be only 2 or 3 centimetres across. Maintaining proper pressure throughout this network requires careful engineering. Too much pressure wastes energy and stresses pipes, potentially causing leaks. Too little pressure means water won't reach upper floors of buildings or flow adequately from taps. Pressure-reducing valves, booster pumps, and strategically located storage tanks all help manage pressure across systems, serving diverse topography and varying elevations. Control systems constantly monitor flows and pressures, adjusting pumps and valves to maintain optimal conditions as demand fluctuates from hour to hour and season to season. Modern systems divide networks into pressure zones, each maintained at appropriate levels for its elevation and local conditions, with boundary valves separating zones while still allowing water to flow between them when needed. Once water is used, it becomes wastewater, beginning its return journey through the sewerage system. Household drains connect to sewer laterals running beneath streets, which flow into progressively larger pipes called collectors and interceptors. Unlike the water distribution system, which operates under pressure, sewerage relies entirely on gravity. Pipes must slope downward at carefully calculated gradients, steep enough to maintain flow and prevent solids from settling, but not so steep as to cause excessive velocity that might damage pipes or create dangerous conditions. Where gravity alone cannot move sewage to treatment plants, pump stations lift it to higher elevations before it continues flowing downward again. These stations are carefully designed to handle not just average flows, but peak demands, with backup pumps ensuring reliability, even if primary equipment fails. Modern sewerage systems typically separate sanitary sewage from stormwater, collecting them in different pipe networks. This separation is crucial because treatment plants cannot handle the enormous volumes of water that enter storm drains during heavy rain. Combined systems, which collect both sanitary sewage and stormwater in the same pipes, still exist in older cities, but they face a persistent problem. During major storms, the combined flow can exceed treatment plant capacity, forcing untreated overflows to be discharged directly to rivers or oceans. These combined sewer overflows represent one of the most significant remaining water quality challenges in many cities, requiring massive infrastructure investments to separate systems or to build enormous storage tunnels that can hold excess flow during storms until it can be treated. At the wastewater treatment plant, sewage undergoes a multi-stage process similar in concept to water treatment, but dealing with far more challenging material. Screening removes large objects, from plastics to items that should never have been flushed. Grit chambers allow sand and heavy materials to settle, protecting downstream equipment from abrasion. Primary settling tanks then allow organic solids to settle as sludge, while fats and oils float to the surface to be skimmed off. The partially treated water continues to secondary treatment, typically activated sludge tanks where billions of bacteria consume dissolved organic matter in an oxygen-rich environment. Final settling tanks allow bacterial flock to settle and be returned to the aeration tanks, while clarified water flows to disinfection before discharge. The entire process might take anywhere from 12 to 24 hours, with water slowly progressing through each stage, gradually transforming from waste into water clean enough to return to rivers or oceans, completing the cycle that began at the water source kilometers away and days earlier. The story of water and sewerage infrastructure is not one that unfolds evenly across the globe. While cities in wealthy nations enjoy nearly universal access to piped water and modern sanitation, billions of people worldwide still lack these basic services. This disparity represents one of the great challenges of our time, with profound implications for public health, economic development, and human dignity. Understanding the global water crisis requires looking beyond simple statistics to appreciate the diverse circumstances that different communities face, from informal settlements surrounding megacities to remote rural villages where traditional practices persist largely unchanged. In many developing nations, urban growth has far outpaced infrastructure development, creating sprawling informal settlements where water and sanitation services are minimal or non-existent. These communities, home to hundreds of millions of people, often occupy marginal land unsuitable for formal development. Hillsides prone to landslides or floodplains that inundate during rains. The lack of formal land tenure makes infrastructure investment risky, as residents may be evicted at any time. Water must be purchased from vendors at prices many times higher than piped water costs, consuming a significant portion of household income. Sanitation facilities, where they exist at all, consist of simple pit latrines shared among many families, creating conditions where disease transmission is nearly inevitable. The impact falls most heavily on children, whose health and development suffer from repeated illness, and on women and girls, who bear primary responsibility for water collection and often face safety risks when using inadequate sanitation facilities. Rural communities face different but equally significant challenges. Distance from water sources means long walks, often several kilometres, to wells or streams that may not provide safe water. The time spent collecting water, typically several hours daily, cannot be spent on education, productive work, or other activities that might improve family circumstances. Seasonal variation compounds the problem, with sources that provide adequate water during wet seasons drying up or becoming more distant during dry periods. Traditional open defecation practices persist in many areas, not from ignorance but because alternatives are unavailable, unaffordable, or culturally inappropriate. The construction of latrines requires materials, labour, and maintenance that exceed the resources of many households, while designs imported from other contexts may not suit local soil conditions, water tables, or cultural preferences. International efforts to address these challenges have evolved considerably over recent decades. Early approaches often focused on building large-scale infrastructure modelled on Western systems with limited success. Centralised water treatment plants and sewer networks, while effective in their original context, proved difficult to implement in communities lacking the institutional capacity, technical expertise, or financial resources to maintain them. Projects would be completed with great fanfare, only to fall into disrepair within months or years as equipment failed, pipes leaked, and trained operators departed. The lesson learned, sometimes painfully, was that technology transfer alone does not create sustainable services. Infrastructure must be appropriate to local conditions, affordable to maintain, and embedded within institutional structures capable of managing it over the long term. More recent approaches emphasize community participation, appropriate technology, and sustainability. Rather than imposing solutions from outside, successful programs engage communities in planning and implementation, ensuring that infrastructure meets actual needs and that people understand and value the improvements. Technologies are chosen for simplicity, reliability, and local maintainability rather than sophistication. A hand pump that village residents can repair with locally available tools serves better than an electric pump requiring specialised parts and expertise. Rainwater harvesting, protected springs, and shallow wells with proper drainage represent significant improvements over traditional sources, even if they fall short of piped water. Similarly, various latrine designs, from simple pit latrines to more elaborate ventilated, improved pit latrines, or composting toilets, offer options suited to different circumstances, preferences, and resources. The concept of scaling up these community-level successes to reach billions of people represents an enormous challenge. Each community is unique, with its own circumstances, resources, and preferences. What works in one place may fail in another. Yet certain principles emerge from successful programs worldwide. Local ownership and management prove crucial for sustainability. When communities control their own water sources and sanitation facilities, Taking responsibility for maintenance and improvement, systems last. External support, whether from governments or international organisations, works best when it empowers local capacity rather than creating dependence. Training local technicians, supporting local institutions, and providing resources that communities can build upon creates more lasting change than delivering fully constructed systems with no local involvement. Financing remains a persistent challenge. The poorest communities, with the greatest need for improved water and sanitation, have the least ability to pay for infrastructure. Various models attempt to bridge this gap. Subsidies from government or donors can reduce costs to affordable levels, though care must be taken to avoid distorting local economies or creating expectations of free services that prove unsustainable. Microfinance allows households to spread costs over time, borrowing to build latrines or install water connections, and repaying from the savings realised through not purchasing vendor water or reduced medical expenses. Social enterprises develop business models where services can be provided profitably at prices the poor can afford, often through efficiency gains, scale economies, or cross-subsidies where wealthier users pay higher rates that support service to lower income areas. The concept of water as a human right has gained increasing recognition in international law and discourse. If access to safe water and sanitation is indeed a basic human right, then governments bear responsibility for ensuring universal access, just as they provide other essential services like security or basic education. This principle, while widely endorsed, remains far from realization. Translating the recognition of rights into actual infrastructure requires resources on a scale that challenges even wealthy nations and exceeds the capacity of many developing countries. The gap between aspiration and reality remains vast, with progress measured in decades rather than years. Technology continues to offer new possibilities for expanding access. Solar-powered pumps eliminate the need for grid electricity, bringing mechanised water supply to remote areas. Ceramic filters provide point-of-use water treatment at costs households can afford, improving water quality even where infrastructure is absent. Mobile phone technology enables remote monitoring of water points, allowing maintenance problems to be detected and addressed quickly. Improved latrine designs reduce construction costs while increasing acceptance and use. None of these technologies alone solves the water crisis, but together they expand the toolkit available to communities and organisations working toward universal access. Perhaps the most profound insight from decades of work on global water challenges is that infrastructure alone does not determine outcomes. The most sophisticated treatment plant means nothing if people lack connections to use it. Latrines remain unused if they don't meet cultural expectations or practical needs. Systems decay without maintenance. What matters ultimately is not just physical infrastructure, but the social, institutional, and economic systems surrounding it. Water and sanitation are not merely technical challenges, but deeply human ones, requiring solutions that acknowledge and work with the full complexity of how people live, what they value, and what resources they can bring to bear on improving their circumstances. The relationship between water infrastructure and the environment has undergone profound transformation in recent decades. For much of history, water systems were designed with a singular focus on human needs, extracting water from nature, using it, and returning waste with minimal consideration for broader ecological impacts. Rivers were dammed, wetlands drained, and natural waterways converted into engineered channels, all in service of human requirements for water supply, flood control, and waste disposal. Yet as understanding of environmental systems deepened and the consequences of past practices became apparent, a new paradigm began to emerge, one that recognizes water infrastructure as part of larger ecological systems that must be managed with attention to sustainability, resilience, and the needs of the natural world itself. Rivers provide perhaps the clearest example of this changing relationship. A river is not merely a water source or a convenient disposal route for treated wastewater, but a living ecosystem supporting countless species, from microscopic organisms to fish and the birds and mammals that depend on them. Dams and diversions that extract water can leave rivers diminished, unable to support the life they once sustained. In some cases, major rivers no longer reach the sea, their entire flow consumed by human uses. The Colorado River in North America and the Yellow River in China both experience periods where they run dry before reaching their deltas, with profound consequences for the ecosystems and communities that historically depended on them. Even where rivers continue to flow, alterations to their natural patterns, the seasonal floods and low flows that shape their ecology over millennia, disrupt the life cycles of species adapted to historical conditions. The recognition of these impacts has led to efforts to balance human water needs with environmental requirements. The concept of environmental flows, the water that must remain in rivers and streams to maintain ecological health, has gained acceptance among water managers and policymakers. Determining appropriate environmental flows requires understanding complex ecological relationships, how much water different species need at different times of year, how river flow affects water quality and temperature, and how changes ripple through food webs from algae to insects to fish to birds. In some cases, this means allowing periodic floods that mimic historical patterns, even though such releases sacrifice stored water that could serve human uses. In others, it means maintaining minimum flows during dry seasons to preserve critical habitats. These decisions often involve difficult trade-offs, particularly in water-scarce regions, where every drop of water has competing demands. Wetlands represent another area where environmental understanding has reshaped water management. For centuries, wetlands were seen primarily as wastelands to be drained and converted to agriculture or development. Their role in the water cycle, filtering pollutants, storing floodwaters, and supporting biodiversity, went unrecognized or unvalued. Vast areas of wetlands disappeared, drained by networks of ditches and pumps. Only gradually did appreciation grow for the functions these ecosystems perform, often more effectively and at lower cost than engineered alternatives. A wetland can filter nutrients and pollutants from agricultural runoff, improving downstream water quality without chemical treatment. It can store stormwater, reducing flood peaks more flexibly than concrete channels and providing habitat simultaneously. Recognition of these values has led to efforts to restore degraded wetlands and to create constructed wetlands as components of water treatment systems. The concept of green infrastructure has emerged as a complement to traditional grey infrastructure of pipes and treatment plants. Green infrastructure uses natural systems and processes to manage water, often providing multiple benefits beyond the primary water management function. Rain gardens, vegetated swales, and permeable pavements allow stormwater to soak into the ground rather than running off into storm drains, reducing both the volume of water that must be managed and the pollutants it carries. Urban forests intercept rainfall in their canopy, slow runoff with their roots, and reduce water demand through cooling effects that lessen irrigation needs. Green roofs absorb rainfall, insulate buildings, reduce urban heat islands, and provide habitat for birds and insects. These approaches don't replace conventional infrastructure, but supplement it, often at lower cost, while providing environmental and social benefits that concrete and steel cannot match. Wastewater treatment itself has evolved to consider environmental impacts more comprehensively. Beyond removing pollutants that cause immediate harm, modern treatment addresses nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus that, while not toxic to humans, can cause severe ecological damage when discharged in excess. These nutrients fertilize algae growth in rivers, lakes, and coastal waters, leading to blooms that die and decompose, consuming oxygen and creating dead zones where fish and other organisms cannot survive. Advanced treatment processes can remove most nutrients, but at significant energy and cost. Some systems use wetlands as final treatment stages, where plants and microorganisms remove nutrients naturally. Others recover nutrients as valuable products, extracting phosphorus that can be used as fertilizer rather than discharging it as waste. The energy intensity of water systems has come under scrutiny as climate change concerns have grown. Pumping, treating, heating and cooling water consumes substantial energy, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Yet water systems also offer opportunities for energy recovery and generation. Hydroelectric power from reservoirs provides renewable energy, though with its own environmental trade-offs. Water flowing through distribution systems can drive small turbines, recovering energy from pressure that would otherwise be dissipated. Wastewater treatment plants can capture methane from anaerobic digestion, generate electricity from flow energy, and extract heat for use in adjacent facilities or district heating systems. The vision of water systems as energy producers, not just consumers, is gradually being realised in pioneering facilities worldwide. Climate change forces a fundamental rethinking of how water systems are designed and operated. Infrastructure built to handle historical climate conditions may prove inadequate as temperatures rise, precipitation patterns shift, and extreme events become more frequent and intense. Reservoirs sized for historical inflows may no longer fill reliably. Treatment plants designed for typical temperatures may struggle when water enters warmer than expected, affecting treatment chemistry and biological processes. Storm drains calculated for 100-year storms may face such events multiple times per decade. Adapting to these changing conditions requires both immediate measures to increase resilience of existing systems and long-term planning that anticipates conditions decades hence, even as those future conditions remain uncertain. The concept of water-sensitive cities integrates these various environmental considerations into urban planning. Rather than treating water as something to be imported, used, and disposed of as quickly as possible, water-sensitive design works with water, incorporating it into the urban landscape in ways that provide multiple benefits. Water features in parks and plazas beautify while managing stormwater. Waterways, rather than being buried in culverts, flow through cities as amenities and corridors for wildlife. Buildings capture rainwater for non-potable uses, reducing both supply and wastewater treatment demands. The city becomes a partner in the water cycle rather than an impediment to it, creating environments more livable for people while reducing environmental impacts. This vision remains aspirational in most places, but examples are emerging worldwide, demonstrating what becomes possible when water infrastructure is conceived not as isolated technical systems, but as integral parts of living, sustainable communities. As we move deeper into the 21st century, water and sewerage systems stand at a crossroads between tradition and innovation. The fundamental principles that have guided water management for thousands of years, gravity flow, separation of clean and contaminated water, biological treatment processes, remain as valid as ever. Yet new technologies, materials, and approaches are transforming how these principles are applied, creating possibilities that would have seemed fantastical even a generation ago. The future of water infrastructure lies not in abandoning what works, but in enhancing and extending it through innovation, creating systems that are more efficient, resilient, and sustainable than anything achieved before. Digital technology is reshaping water management in profound ways. Sensors embedded throughout water and sewer networks provide continuous monitoring of flows, pressures, and water quality, generating vast streams of data about system performance. Machine learning algorithms analyze this data, identifying patterns that reveal developing problems before they become failures. A gradual change in flow patterns might indicate a growing leak. Shifts in pressure could signal a valve malfunction or unauthorized connection. Water quality variations might point to contamination entering the system. By detecting these issues early, utilities can respond proactively, fixing small problems before they become expensive emergencies. This predictive maintenance approach extends infrastructure life, reduces costs, and improves service reliability in ways impossible with traditional periodic inspection regimes. Advanced materials are creating new possibilities for pipe construction and repair. Traditional materials like cast iron, concrete, and PVC each have strengths and limitations. Newer materials combine beneficial properties in novel ways. Fiber-reinforced polymers offer strength approaching steel, with weight closer to plastic, simplifying installation and reducing transport costs. Self-healing concretes incorporate bacteria that activate when cracks form, producing limestone that seals small fissures before they grow. Coatings and linings can restore old pipes without excavation, inserting flexible sleeves that cure in place to create smooth, corrosion-resistant surfaces within deteriorated mains. These innovations don't eliminate the need for pipe replacement, but expand options for maintaining and extending existing infrastructure. Decentralized systems are emerging as alternatives or complements to centralized water and sewer networks. Rather than treating all wastewater at a single large plant, distributed systems treat water closer to where it's used, potentially recovering resources more efficiently and reducing the length of pipes needed. A building might treat its own wastewater to standards suitable for toilet flushing and irrigation, using fresh water only for drinking and cooking. Neighborhoods might share small treatment facilities sized for local needs, with simpler technology and easier oversight than massive regional plants. These approaches work particularly well in new developments or areas where extending centralized networks would be prohibitively expensive. They also offer resilience benefits, as failure of one component doesn't disable the entire system. Water reuse technologies continue advancing, driven by scarcity and environmental concerns. Beyond basic treatment for irrigation or industrial uses, advanced systems can produce water meeting any quality standard required, even exceeding typical drinking water quality. Membrane filtration, reverse osmosis, advanced oxidation, and other processes remove contaminants that conventional treatment cannot address, from pharmaceuticals and personal care products to industrial chemicals and microplastics. Some facilities now produce multiple grades of water, with treatment intensity and cost matched to intended use. The highest quality water goes to users requiring it, while less demanding applications receive water treated to appropriate but less stringent standards. This tiered approach optimizes both resource use and energy consumption. Energy recovery from water systems is becoming more sophisticated and widespread. Beyond the methane capture that's been practiced for decades, new approaches extract value from wastewater's other energy forms. Temperature energy, the heat contained in wastewater, can be recovered with heat exchangers and used for heating buildings or water. Flow energy, the movement of water through pipes and treatment processes, can drive small turbines generating electricity. Some treatment plants now produce more energy than they consume, becoming net energy generators. This transformation from energy consumer to producer doesn't just reduce operating costs, but contributes to broader sustainability goals, displacing fossil fuel use and reducing carbon emissions. Nutrient recovery represents another frontier in transforming waste into resource. The nitrogen and phosphorus in wastewater, problematic when discharged to the environment, are valuable as fertilizer. Technologies to extract these nutrients in usable forms are advancing rapidly. Struvite, a crystal formed from phosphorus, ammonia and magnesium, can be recovered from wastewater and sold as slow-release fertilizer. Other processes concentrate nutrients into forms suitable for agricultural use. As concerns about the sustainability of industrial fertilizer production grow, particularly the energy-intensive process of synthesizing nitrogen fertilizer, recovering nutrients from wastewater becomes increasingly attractive, both economically and environmentally. The vision of wastewater treatment plants as resource recovery facilities, not just disposal sites, is gradually becoming reality. Artificial intelligence and automation are enabling more sophisticated system control. Rather than operating according to fixed schedules or simple rules, smart systems adjust continuously to changing conditions, optimizing performance in real time. Treatment processes can be fine-tuned to handle variations in incoming water quality while minimizing chemical and energy use. Distribution systems can adjust pressures and flows to meet demand while reducing leakage. Predictive models anticipate future conditions based on weather forecasts, usage patterns, and other factors, allowing systems to prepare for changes rather than merely react to them. As these systems mature, they promise not just efficiency gains, but fundamentally new capabilities, managing complexity that would overwhelm human operators. The convergence of water, energy, and food systems is driving integrated approaches to resource management. Water is needed to produce energy and food. Energy is required to treat and move water. Food production consumes vast quantities of both water and energy. Recognizing these interconnections, some planners are designing systems that optimize across all three domains rather than treating them separately. Industrial clusters locate complementary operations together, with one facility's waste becoming another's input. Urban farming operations use treated wastewater for irrigation while providing food locally, reducing transport energy. District systems provide heating, cooling, and water services from shared facilities, achieving efficiencies impossible with separate systems. These integrated approaches remain relatively rare, but they point toward future infrastructure that transcends traditional sectoral boundaries. Nature-based solutions are gaining prominence as complements to engineered systems. Rather than viewing infrastructure as purely technological, these approaches harness natural processes and ecosystems to provide water services. Forests protect water sources, reducing treatment costs. Wetlands polish treated wastewater, providing final cleanup before discharge. Green corridors manage urban stormwater while creating recreational amenities and wildlife habitat. These solutions typically provide multiple benefits beyond their primary water function, improving air quality, moderating urban temperatures, supporting biodiversity, and enhancing quality of life. They also tend to be resilient and adaptive, responding to changing conditions in ways that rigid engineered systems cannot. The most effective approaches combine green and grey infrastructure, using each where it performs best and creating systems more robust than either approach alone could provide. Looking forward, the trajectory of water infrastructure development seems clear in broad outline, if uncertain in details. Systems will become more efficient, making better use of limited resources. They will be more resilient, better able to withstand and recover from disruptions. They will be more sustainable, working with natural systems rather than against them and recovering value from waste streams. And they will be more equitable, extending services to populations currently underserved. The technologies and approaches to achieve these goals are emerging now, being tested and refined in pioneering installations worldwide. What remains uncertain is how quickly these innovations will spread, reaching the billions who need them and transforming infrastructure that in many places remains rooted in paradigms a century old or more. The story of water and sewerage infrastructure is ultimately a story about civilization itself. From the moment humans gathered in permanent settlements, the challenge of bringing clean water in and carrying waste away has shaped where we live, how we build, and how healthy and prosperous our communities can become. Over thousands of years, across countless cultures, ingenious minds have grappled with this fundamental challenge, developing solutions that reflect the resources, knowledge, and values of their times. The great aqueducts of Rome, the canal systems of Persia, the medieval monasteries with their careful water management, the ambitious engineering projects of the industrial age, each represents a response to the eternal need for water infrastructure, adapted to particular circumstances and possibilities. What emerges from this long history is both continuity and change. The basic requirements remain constant across millennia. People need access to clean water for drinking, cooking, and washing. They need ways to dispose of waste that protect health and maintain livable environments. These needs are as fundamental in the 21st century as they were in ancient Mesopotamia or medieval Paris. Yet the methods of meeting these needs have evolved dramatically, shaped by advancing scientific understanding, new technologies and materials, growing populations and urbanization, and changing relationships with the natural environment. Each generation inherits infrastructure from the past, while adapting it to present circumstances and building for future needs. The public health achievements enabled by modern water and sewerage systems stand among humanity's greatest accomplishments. In the industrialized nations that first developed comprehensive infrastructure, waterborne diseases that once killed thousands became rare or disappeared entirely within a few decades. Life expectancy increased dramatically, with improved water and sanitation contributing as much or more than medical advances to this transformation. Children grew healthier and taller, no longer stunted by repeated infections. Women were freed from the burden of water carrying and could pursue education and employment. Cities became more livable, no longer plagued by the overwhelming stench and squalor that characterized urban life in earlier eras. The benefits extended far beyond health, enabling economic development, social advancement, and quality of life improvements that would have been impossible without reliable water services. Yet these achievements remain unevenly distributed globally. Billions still lack access to safely managed water and sanitation, living with the health burdens, economic constraints, and daily hardships that comprehensive infrastructure eliminates. This disparity represents both a moral imperative and a practical challenge. The moral case for universal access is clear. Water and sanitation are fundamental to human dignity and well-being, essential for realizing other rights and capabilities. The practical challenge lies in extending services to all who need them, given limited resources, diverse circumstances, and competing priorities. Progress continues, with hundreds of millions gaining access to improved water and sanitation in recent decades, but much remains to be done to achieve the goal of universal coverage. The invisible nature of water infrastructure presents particular challenges for maintaining public awareness and support. Most people think little about where their water comes from or where waste goes, taking for granted services that depend on vast, complex systems requiring constant maintenance and periodic renewal. This invisibility makes it difficult to build political support for necessary investments, as infrastructure buried underground lacks the visibility of schools, hospitals, or roads. Yet deferred maintenance eventually comes due, often at far greater cost than timely investment would have required. Cities worldwide are learning this lesson, sometimes painfully, as aging infrastructure fails and emergency repairs disrupt service and strain budgets. Building understanding of infrastructure needs and maintaining commitment to long-term stewardship represents an ongoing challenge for utilities and civic leaders. Climate change adds urgency to questions about infrastructure resilience and adaptation. Water systems designed for historical climate conditions may prove inadequate as temperatures rise. Precipitation patterns shift, and extreme events become more frequent. Some regions face increasing water scarcity, requiring difficult choices about allocation among competing uses and driving investment in alternative sources like desalination and water reuse. Others confront more intense rainfall and flooding, overwhelming drainage systems, and threatening treatment plants. Rising sea levels threaten coastal infrastructure, from water intakes to wastewater outfalls. Adapting to these changing conditions requires not just technical solutions, but institutional flexibility, long-term planning under uncertainty, and willingness to make investments whose benefits may not be fully realized for decades. The relationship between water infrastructure and social equity deserves ongoing attention. Historically, infrastructure development often benefited wealthier areas first, with service to poorer neighbourhoods lagging or absent entirely. Even where universal coverage is achieved, quality of service can vary, with low-income areas experiencing more frequent service interruptions, lower water pressure, or ageing infrastructure more prone to problems. Pricing structures that don't account for ability to pay can make water unaffordable for the poorest households, forcing impossible choices between water and other necessities. Ensuring that water infrastructure serves all equitably, regardless of income, race, or social status, requires conscious effort and appropriate policies, not simply technical competence in engineering. Looking forward, the challenges facing water infrastructure are substantial but not insurmountable. Aging systems in developed nations require renewal, a massive undertaking, but one for which technologies, expertise, and resources exist. Extending comprehensive services to all who currently lack them demands sustained commitment, appropriate technology choices, and institutional development, but successful models exist that can be adapted and scaled. Adapting to climate change and increasing environmental sustainability requires innovation and investment, but also builds on growing knowledge and emerging technologies. What's needed most is sustained attention and commitment, recognition that water infrastructure, though invisible, remains fundamental to health, prosperity, and quality of life. The water and sewerage systems we build and maintain today shape possibilities for generations to come. Infrastructure lasts for decades or centuries, constraining or enabling future development long after its creators are gone. Decisions made now about where to extend service, what technologies to employ, how to balance competing needs, and how much to invest will determine what's possible in 2050 or 2100. This long-time horizon requires thinking beyond immediate needs and political cycles, considering not just current populations but those yet to come. It's a profound responsibility, one that connects us to the ancient engineers who built systems we still use and to future generations who will inherit what we create. In the end, water infrastructure represents a compact between past, present, and future, between individual and community, between humanity and the natural world. We depend on systems created by previous generations, maintain them for our own use, and pass them on to those who follow. We benefit as individuals, but can only achieve reliable water services through collective action and shared investment. We draw water from nature and return it altered, with consequences that ripple through ecosystems and communities. Managing these relationships well, creating infrastructure that serves people equitably while respecting environmental limits, adapting to changing conditions while maintaining essential services, represents one of the great ongoing challenges of civilization. It's a challenge humanity has faced in various forms for thousands of years and will continue confronting as long as people gather in communities, needing water to sustain life and sanitation to maintain health. The story continues, written daily by engineers, operators, policymakers, and citizens working to ensure that this most basic and essential infrastructure serves everyone now and into the future as reliably and sustainably as human ingenuity can achieve.